there's been a collapse in standards and training. Training was an easy thing to cut back on in the years of austerity, but actually a lot of the police officers in the Met do not have the same high standards of training that they once did. Even it's going through a very tough time, Henry, and I think it has been for some time. I think it does a lot of good, which should never be forgotten. But yeah, I think it's the people within it and the people that know it would almost uniformly accept that it's not had the best of runs.
Right. And so was that the reason why you decided I need to go beyond writing, 1,000, 2,000 word feature? There's a whole book in this.
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, I've covered the Met for about 16, 17 years since joining, national newspapers, and it seemed to me that a scandal would bubble up now and again about policing, and everyone would get very upset about it and say, "What are we going to do about this?" And then it would die down again, and nothing much would change. And I just wondered if there was a way of trying to piece together what happened. So I sort of start the book in 1993, which is obviously the year that Stephen Lawrence was murdered, a hugely significant year for the Met, a hugely significant crime for the Met. And I trace its modern history from there, really, and try and explain how we've got into this situation.
Right. So let's take that murder. I remember it very, very, very well. I covered it myself when I was at a different organization. What was the impact, would you say, of that incident, which cast a long shadow? I remember Reverend Jesse Jackson came over here, Reverend Al Sharpton from the States as well. Former President Nelson Mandela, so before he was president, came over here and said Black lives here are cheap like they are in South Africa. So how significant a murder was that? And was it in some ways a wasted opportunity by the police for a reset?
I think it was one of the most significant cases in this country's history in terms of crime. Nelson Mandela came over, as you said, and it really spurred the Met into action in a case where they hadn't done much up to that point. And I mean, Cressida Dick, the former commissioner, is on record as saying it changed. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but she said it changed policing forever, I think. The fallout of that and what was revealed. And obviously a lot was revealed over many years. We had a public inquiry into the case in 1999, which was supposed to put it all to bed. And then, decades later, more stuff was coming out about it, which was obviously deeply distressing for the family.
Well, when you consider the late Sir William Macpherson's label of institutional racism, which came actually from the African-American civil rights leader, Stokely Carmichael, you would think that the recommendations from his report, about 70 of them, would have provided a blueprint for a changed force. But here we are, a generation or more later, with Sir Mark Rowley, the new Met Commissioner, saying he's going to be ruthless in rooting out racist and misogynistic officers, he's going to deal with corruption, etc. And it makes you wonder why those 70 recommendations, for all the enthusiasm with which they were adopted at the time, have not resulted in a transformed force.
Yes, I think I can't give you a straightforward answer to that, Henry. Yeah. I'm afraid it's such a complicated issue, and I don't, it's very difficult to say why things happened the way they did. I think that there was an attempt by the police in a big way to confront racism, but it's such a complex matter.
But Tommy, wasn't this about racism though? Tom,
with 30,000 people.
Yeah, Tommy, it wasn't just about racism though. It was actually about professionalism. It was also about corruption, because there was allegations of corruption against one of the officers who was supervising Dwayne Brooks, at the time, and being close to the father of one of the suspects. Also about quality of policing, quality of scenes of crime evidence, quality of detective work, quality of family liaison, inquest system, all of that in that one case. And then what about some of the other cases? You start off with the late Stephen Lawrence and the fight of Neville and Doreen Lawrence's parents for justice, but you go through other cases in your book, Broken Yard. So let's deal with some of those too.
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. Professionalism is a massive issue, and I think that that's one of the things I conclude at the end, that there's been a collapse in standards and training. Training was an easy thing to cut back on in the years of austerity, but actually a lot of the police officers in the Met do not have the same high standards of training that they once did. even though the leaders of today profess that the force is better than it ever was. I think in many ways that's not true. But yes, I cover the Daniel Morgan murder, which is, in my opinion, just as grave a crime and had such a seismic impact on policing as well and society. That family was put through the ringer too.
And he was an investigative, or was he some kind of private detective or something, Daniel Morgan?
Yes, he was a
Yes.
private detective who was found with an axe embedded in his head in 1987, and there were allegations that corrupt police officers from the Metropolitan Police were involved in, if not the murder itself, then at least the cover-up, because Daniel Morgan was probing into areas they didn't like.
Yeah.
But sorry, go on.
You know, so they've got the Daniel Morgan one, and that casts a very long shadow. And Dame Cressida Dick, the former Met Commissioner, doesn't come out of that very well, because I understand she was accused of being defensive on that, as well as other labels of corruption and institutional racism during her time as commissioner.
Yes, she. It was appalling. There was an independent review published last year that concluded that would have concluded years earlier if Cressida Dick and the Metropolitan Police had not refused to disclose documents to this independent review, and Dick was personally involved in that and was criticised. And in fact, that independent review literally called for a new law to try and force police officers to tell the truth. Yeah. They called for a statutory duty of candour, because the dishonesty and mendacity they had encountered in picking over that case blew their minds.
But what I can imagine, Tom, mendacity, dishonesty, the code of silence that police often use to label communities where people don't want to open up about something they've seen, but they themselves, it would appear, in cases like this, are just as guilty, and they lecture the rest of the world, the other police forces around the world, on how to do the job properly. This is the extraordinary thing.
Yes, they do, and I make the argument in the book that it was a very well respected police force internationally back in the sort of 80s and early 90s, and it seems to have lost its way somewhat. I do want to stress as well, though, that they do. It's a complicated situation. They do a lot of good,
yes.
And they confront situations on our behalf, which not many people would want to do. That they're really at the intersection of sort of, deeply distressing incidents throughout society, which are very difficult to handle. And I don't think we should lose sight of that.
No, Tom, I'm not looking to lose sight of that. I know people personally who would count as friends who are both retired officers of 30 years vintage and people who've been in the force maybe 10, 15 years and one or two newbies. And I fully respect them and the work they do. But time and again, we hear and we see examples of truly reprehensible individuals who should be nowhere near the uniform. They disgrace it at every turn, and yet they seem somehow to get in and to stay in.
Yes, I think that's partly true. I mean, one of the reasons why Cressida Dick was ousted as commissioner was because Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, was appalled that the police officers caught up in the Charing Cross police station scandal, where they were exchanging appalling racist, sexist, misogynistic messages. Some of them were allowed to keep their jobs, and Dick couldn't intervene in the misconduct process. And in fact, Mark Rowley, the new commissioner, has said today that he'd like to see a new legislation brought in. I think he's just said that, and that would be a big thing, because that's one key way that you could drive up accountability and standards, I think.
I'm talking to Tom Harper. He is an investigative journalist. He's just written a new book, Broken Yard, The Fall of the Metropolitan Police. And you start your book, Tom, with the appalling case of the murder of Stephen Lawrence and how the police botched it and mishandled it, and it became an international cause célèbre. So if Sir Mark Rowley, the new Met Commissioner, or Dame Cressida Dick, his predecessor, were to get a copy of your book, what do you think they would make of it, and would they be able to learn any lessons? Do you explain how the Metropolitan Police, having fallen, you say, could now rise?
Yes, I try to do that, because I don't just want it to be viewed as a hatchet job. I try to be constructive and point to what they could do. I don't know what they would think when they picked it up. People that report on the police independently and critically are not welcomed very much, so there's few of us that do that, I would suggest. But privately, I think that many would accept some of the criticisms in the book and accept that things need to change. Many senior officers are on the record in the book saying exactly that. So I hope that it is viewed constructively by serving officers today.
I'm just looking at the last few Met commissioners, certainly those who have been in the job during my time as a journalist. So we're talking Dame Cressida Dick, Sir Bernard Hogan Howe, is it Sir Paul Stevenson, Sir John Stevens, both Lord Stevens now, then Lord Blair and Lord Condom. They say all political careers end in failure, but perhaps all Met commissioner posts end in failure too. Why is that?
Well, it's arguably the most difficult job in this country. I mean, we shouldn't forget that. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job. As I say, the police are brushing up against terrible situations across society, and they have to make very difficult decisions every day. But yes, many of them have ended under a cloud. Probably Lord Stevens is the only one.
He's the only one. He was the only one. Copper's Copper he was called, wasn't he? But then again, so was Hogan Howe.
Yeah, but even he fell over Operation Midland with the VIP paedophile scandal.
Yeah, he did. But Tom, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk again about the Metropolitan Police and policing in general. But thank you very much for coming on to discuss Broken Yard, the fall of the Metropolitan Police, live on Times Radio.